Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where we talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts. I always forget it's Apple Podcasts, not iTunes anymore. Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and I think Rumble now too. It's everywhere, so go find it. But I really want you to go to YouTube and type in Annette Talks and you'll find it there. And I'm running a little contest right now. As soon as I get up to 800 subscribers, I'm sending out a free 72-hour kit. And so go to YouTube and subscribe if you haven't already. And today we have Dr. Barke back again. Hi, Dr. Barke.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. And last time we were on, our episode did not make it onto YouTube. Let's just put it that way. It was about COVID. Today, we're not going to be talking about COVID.
What's COVID?
Yeah, what is that? But you are known, your name is Dr. Jeffrey Barke, and you're known as one of America's frontline doctors, which is a group of doctors that were willing to come out and stick your necks out and talk about things, treatments and things for COVID that a lot of other doctors weren't willing to talk about. A lot of us remember you on the front steps of the Supreme Court building. And you've written a book called COVID-19, A Physician's Take on the Exaggerated Fear of the Coronavirus, which can be found on your website, rxforliberty.com. And so that lets us know who you are and why. I've done a few other episodes with you. And by the way, if you missed our last episode because you're on YouTube, go to AnnetteTalks.com or one of the other subscriber providers and go to episode 78. That's the one that did not make it onto YouTube. So, but today we're going to talk about education because that's your other specialty, right? Tell us what you do in education.
What's the other hat I wear very proudly? I was an elected school board member, Los Alamitos Unified School District here in Southern California for about 12 years. And I realized after doing that it's very, very difficult to make changes from the inside in a government unionized school. Every change from a free market perspective that you want to make is shot down because unions have incredible power. And then, of course, there's other board members that often aren't as courageous. If I can give you, I'll give you a simple example. I think your audience will understand this. Los Al Unified is considered one of the best districts in Southern California. We, along with Irvine, we switch 1 and 2 as scores come out on an annual basis. And despite us being the top school district in Orange County, at our high school, Los Alamitos High School, we had 45% of our kids that were below grade level in math. Mm. And we're not an inner city school. Mm-hmm. We're a pretty affluent district that encompasses, you all may know these cities, Seal Beach, which is coastal Orange County, Los Alamitos, mm-hmm. Rossmore, unincorporated Orange County. We're a very affluent, relatively conservative district. Yet despite that, 45%, can you imagine that? 45% of our kids can't do math at grade level at the high school. So knowing this as a board member, I requested some changes to be made. One change was to prevent kids that were below grade level, not just in math, but also in ELA, English Language Arts, to not be allowed to take electives or participate in athletics or things like that as a motivation to get them up to grade level. And we would provide them with free tutoring to the extent that they needed it to help them. And I was told we couldn't do that. And the reason why is, if not for some of these after school programs, athletics and electives, some of these kids would otherwise drop out of high school. So don't punish those kids because they can't do math or they can't read and write for dropping out of high school. Okay, fine. How about if we incentivize the teachers, benchmark testing, beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, and the teachers that most effectively increase the scores throughout the year would get a financial bonus. This would be an off-contract bonus. We could get a company to donate this money. So it would come from outside the general fund. And we would incentivize the teachers, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, whatever it is, incentivize the teachers. Nope, Barke, you can't do that. Why not? because the teachers have a contract that dictate what they get paid, and they don't get paid for performance. They get paid based on the number of years they've been teaching and whether or not they have a higher degree.
Right.
Okay, fine. How about this idea? This was my final idea, and then I kind of gave up and realized that there are more effective ways to create educational opportunities for kids. Final idea was, in our local community, we have these tutoring places, Tutoring Club, Mathmasium, Kunan, private organizations that offer tutoring to kids in various subjects. And I said, okay, how about all the kids that are below grade level? We give them a coupon free for tutoring twice a week until we bring their scores up to grade level. And no one will be forced to do that, but it'll be offered to any kid that wants it, to the parents that will pay for one of the local private organizations or a private tutor if they'd preferred. There's a lot of folks in our community that privately tutor, especially for math. And then I was told, no, you can't do that either. Well, why not? Because that would imply that somehow our teachers aren't capable of teaching our kids to get up to grade level. And I said, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. We've been working on this for years. We have the same math tutors, math teachers, and yet for some reason our kids are below grade level. So the solution that the district implemented is they took all the math teachers, they sent them up to Stanford for it was a 2-week course on math education to try to get them up to speed to be better teachers. The following year, again, we track scores. And in fact, our scores dropped by a couple points despite our best efforts. So the failure of government education, and this is just the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic, is staggering. And then when you add into it all the other propaganda and garbage that's going on, like at Los Al, my old school district, they just now approved recently, it was national news because a lot of parents were unhappy about it. They approved an ethnic studies elective. And in California, our soon to be recalled governor is about to sign into law an ethnic studies mandated course at the high school for high school graduation. And ethnic studies, when you pull back the curtains on the course that they approved, written all over it and the thumbprints all over it is a foundation of critical race theory.
I knew that was coming.
That this ethnic studies is based on. And so, listen, Annette, the good news here is that, especially with Zoom and so forth, more parents are involved. They're sitting behind the computer like we are, watching what's going on in the classroom, and they're very unhappy about it. Some of this stuff is now bleeding out because the teachers just can't help themselves. And more parents are pulling their kids out of government school. At Los Al, the official stats haven't come out, but I understand that enrollment is down something like 25 to 30%. And I think that's great. So we have more homeschool parents, and homeschooling is an option. It sounds overwhelming to the average parent, but it's really not that bad. And at the end of the day, if you want your kids to grow up with your value system, the only way to ensure that is by you being their teacher and not turning them over for 6 or 8 hours a day with people that you don't trust to share your values. So after my stint at Los Al, I got unelected because of these changes I tried to make. The unions ran a candidate at me, and I missed being elected by something like 15 or 20 votes. And looking back, it was a blessing. My wife always says everything happens for a reason. And as a result of that, I got involved in starting a charter school. It's the first free public classical education charter school in California. We're in Orange, California. We use the curriculum of BCSI, Barney Charter School Initiative. Funny sounding name, but that's the charter school movement that came out of Hillsdale College. Stephen Barney gave seed money to Hillsdale to start this program. Hillsdale College has, I think it's now 22 charter schools in 10 states, including, I think, 2 in the great state of Colorado. Yep. And
it was in my head. I was like, charter school, Hillsdale. And so as soon as we got done recording our last episode, I went on Googled it and I found one 10 minutes away from me. And so I was like, what? I had no idea. And I didn't even know what classical education was. I didn't know anything. So I went on there and I reserved a spot to go do a tour. So I went down and toured it. You know what? I wanted to be there. I wanted that to be my school. There were pictures of the founding fathers on the wall. There were quotes on the wall, Winston Churchill. I mean, we stopped in one class where they were reading Pride and Prejudice and they were watching it. And he said that they were watching it and they were discussing it. And I said, well, that's the BBC version, right? And he said, oh, of course, there is no other version. And so, and then, you know, I talked to the administrator and I found out that that classical education is kind of what I've achieved in my life over my entire life, but including my public school education of the 70s and the 80s, right? Before things have really changed a lot. There was almost no electronics in those classrooms. They talk to each other, they write.
Yeah, by the way, we don't allow cell phones on our school campus.
Yeah, they said they only allowed them in the lockers. They weren't allowed to.
If a kid brings a cell phone, he has to check it in. And then when they leave for the day, they check it out. We want our kids at recess and PE and lunch, we want them talking to each other. And we teach them how to do that. It's the lost art of conversation.
Yeah, and they use Socratic method. And I mean, I signed my kids up. Of course, they're all waitlisted. I also actually applied to teach there. So I haven't heard back from them. I don't know if it's going to happen. But if I was,
you know, by the way, if you look at their charter petition, of course, everyone is different. They probably have a priority list of who gets into the school. And typically it's something like, if you're a teacher and you have a kid, your kid has priority. If you're a school board member, if you have a sibling at the school and you have a young one coming on, you have priority and so forth. In our school, at least, and maybe it's the same in Colorado, one of the priorities is if you're a staff member, and that would include somebody, for example, that's a substitute teacher. And so one mechanism is if you were able to get to be a substitute teacher or administrative assistant or a lunch aide or a whatever,
anything,
that,
right?
yeah, then you might be able to gain some priority. You know, I don't know if it's worthwhile briefly describing what is classical education. We can if you want. Most people don't.
I had to write a word essay as part of my application.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I learned, but it's what a lot of us have developed over our lifetimes of reading on our own, that what we didn't get in public education.
Yeah, Katie O'Toole, who is Dr. Larry Arnn's daughter, Dr. O'Toole, runs the BCSI program at Hillsdale. Part of what they do for our school and other affiliated schools is they provide professional development, they provide board training, they don't provide money, they provide our curriculum. So we being the board members, were at Hillsdale College last fall, and Dr. O'Toole was one of our key speakers. She's absolutely brilliant. And one of the things I'll never forget, because it's hard to wrap your hand around what is classical education and then be able to explain it to somebody else. Her description I thought was perfect, and it's one sentence, and it is, classical education is the education our founders received. So we never used to have to distinguish classical education from garbage education, what's going on now. It's the way we used to educate our kids back in the day. And that is, kids learn from the greatest thinkers in Western civilization: Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Homer, Shakespeare, etc. And they learn from primary sources. So nowadays, if you're in a history class at a high school, government school, you'll have a textbook about history. And you'll learn about history through the author's perspective, because somebody wrote that history textbook. At Hillsdale and at the Barney Charter School, charter schools, when you learn about history, you don't read somebody else's textbook. You read the documents of the founders. So if you're learning about the Revolutionary War, you'll read about the folks that fought the Revolutionary War. You'll read Thomas Jefferson's own words when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and the writers of the Constitution. Certainly you'll have a teacher that will help interpret some of the language from the day, but you're not reading somebody else's perspective. You're reading the perspective of those that made history. Same thing when you study World War I, World War II, etc. You're not just simply reading somebody's book and interpretation. you'll read from the soldiers and the leaders and the generals who were there that were making military decisions. So that's a big difference with classical education.
It
There's
is.
a lot of memorization early on, the grammar phase, which is classical education is basically broken down into three components. There's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar, that's where grammar school comes from. A lot of memorization. Most schools nowadays have stopped having kids memorize the timetables, for example.
Yeah, I don't get
When
that.
we do that, we have them chant it, we have them memorize it. We have mnemonics to help them remember a lot of things, names and dates and so forth. And then you move into the logic stage. And that is, now that you've memorized this wealth of information, what does it actually mean? Now we're going to put context to the things that you memorized. And then finally, the rhetoric stage, which roughly corresponds with high school. Now we want you to understand it to such an extent that you could teach it to somebody else. And that's where the Socratic method comes in. Socratic, of course, comes from Socrates. And he discovered and described a method of learning by asking questions. So kids will sit around in a circle, and the teacher primarily is just a moderator of discussion. The teacher will ask questions, allow kids to ask questions, and then encourage a robust debate and discussion about whatever the topic is. That's basically the Socratic method. So that's in a nutshell what classical education is, and it's a lost art. It's a lost mechanism of learning. It's a superior way of learning. And at the Barney Charter School Initiative schools, including ours, there is no wokeness. There's no fluff. It's not to say we won't have electives, we will, but there'll be meaningful electives, and only when the basics have already been mastered. The purpose of education originally was to do several important things. One is, of course, provide a baseline knowledge of the 3 R's, but it was also the Americanization of citizens and immigrants alike. We had people pouring in from all over the world years ago. We still have that. And we wanted them to understand what the American dream was and what the American culture is. And, I think the American culture and the American experiment is best described on every coin that's minted. And that's the 3 things on every coin, which is liberty or freedom, which may be most important. In God we trust. No, we're not a religious school, but we are proudly a Judeo-Christian valued school. And then e pluribus unum. By the way, that reminds me, all the Barney Charter School classical education schools teach Latin as their foreign language. It's so important. Yeah. So e pluribus unum is Latin for out of many, one. Originally was out of the 13 colonies, one United States of America. But more recently, it's out of all these cultures and ethnicities around the world coming to America to be one America culture. So we're not a hyphenated school. We believe that people that come and naturalize or as an American as anybody else, they can keep their own ethnicity and heritage. And that's, of course, important. But we teach American culture, and we're proud of it. And we don't apologize for being an American school.
Yeah, and the goal, it seems, of the classical education is to raise up a good citizen, a citizen of a democratic, free society. And so those people have to be able to debate, discuss, understand what's going on. And they have to understand the founding, and they have to understand the Constitution. They have to understand our government system here. And
absolutely.
That's, to me, when I walked into that school, I thought, this is home, and this is awesome. You do not get that sense in the public schools at all. Having spent time in both now, yes, it's not even close. That's why I said, I don't care if my girls do waitlist. And I applied to teach, but now I think I'm going to go back and look on that website again. What else do they have? Because yeah, I'll do whatever job it takes to get
whatever you have to do. If you have to clean the restrooms, get in there.
Whatever, just get in there and get them in there. And then maybe, eventually I'll teach. But having subbed for the public schools, that's not a good time. Teaching in a classical education school, to me, would be awesome, because I would.
We thought originally when we opened this school, we were nervous that we weren't sure if we were going to get enough kids that wanted to go. We even hired one of the founders, co-founders with me. We hired his daughter, who came home from college, to canvass the local area with little brochures. And we had to stop we had to stop her within about a week of canvassing because we had such an overwhelming response. And we just expanded from 5th to 6th grade. We'll open up our 6th grade in the fall. And we have over 600 kids on a waiting list to get into our school. And it's wonderful, but terrifying at the same time, because it makes me really sad that we can't accommodate so many people, so many kids that want to get into our school. So we're actively looking to try to open up a second campus. As a matter of fact, we were just on a Zoom call with Hillsdale yesterday talking about this. They offer wonderful tutelage and advice, connect us with the other BCSI schools around the country so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. How do you open a second school? What should the leadership structure look like, et cetera? How do you hire the headmaster? Hillsdale Vets, our headmaster, that's the name for a charter school principal. Right. So they offer wonderful resources like that. And we're excited to have an opportunity to open up a second campus, hopefully August 2022.
Oh, that would be awesome. How long has your current school been open?
Just since last August.
Oh, yeah.
This is our inaugural year. You know, we thought, yeah, let's open a charter school in the middle of a pandemic. What could possibly go wrong with that? But interestingly, despite the pandemic, we never closed our doors. We stayed open to in-person learning. We refused to kick the kids out and just go online because, as a physician, I understood the science. And our school is not unionized like most charter schools. Most charter schools are not unionized schools. And so we didn't have the pressure of the union telling us what to do. And our teachers are so wonderful. Many of them came from the public sector and took a cut in pay because, as they describe it, for the first time in their career, they're at a school that believes what they believe and they don't have to hide who they are. We had a teacher shift over from private schools as well. And we attracted many kids from private schools because instead of paying $15,000 a year or whatever the private school tuition is, now it's free. We're a free public school. And we also attracted a lot of homeschoolers, moms and dads that really didn't like homeschooling. They just did it because of they didn't want their kids to be indoctrinated. Now felt comfortable to send them to our school because they knew that we had a similar value system as they did and their kids wouldn't be indoctrinated. I like to use a little expression to describe what our school is, and that is homeschool values in a traditional public setting. Yeah. And I think that's why, in part, why we're attracting so many community kids to come on over to our school.
Because it's the best of both worlds. Because yeah, I don't want to homeschool either. That's I've never wanted to. I already have enough time with my kids. I mean, when I'm with them, I'm with them, and I'm a single mom, so it's just me. When I have them, I have 75% of the time they're with me. But I want them to get that homeschool style of education, but somewhere else. And so that's why the charter school is perfect for me. So if I can get us in there, I'm doing it. But COVID is one of the reasons why you have so many of these people lining up, because so many of us, there are probably 3 or 4 Facebook groups here in our school district, Douglas County School District, dedicated to fighting the school board. Because are you showing us your?
I just realized as I'm looking at myself, I'm wearing this shirt that's made by American Freedom Company, which is a wonderful patriotic organization.
Well, I like the front says, don't try to.
They make great products. You can find them online, American Freedom Company. And this is just one of their shirts that I thought was kind of cool.
This podcast has been brought to you by.
Right, exactly.
No, but we have a whole group of parents that are spending a lot of our time fighting the school board right now. First, it was we're not going back in masks and we're not vaccinating our kids next semester. That was we won that victory. The email has come out and they've said no masks, no vaccines required next year, no social distancing, everything back to normal. Except for the big caveat that if there's an immune compromised teacher, she may require her class to wear masks. So a bunch of us are like, no, that happens. My kid's coming out of that class, not happening. But anyway, so a lot of us, now that's gone. So our current battle is now battling CRT. And so that's a huge battle that we're doing. And we're in Douglas County, which is one of the more conservative counties in Colorado. And we opened up and we have our, what do you call it? The 3 commissioners, county commissioners are pretty conservative. And so even in this mostly conservative county, we're still having to fight the school board on bringing in the stupid CRT. And so a lot of us are like, I don't want to spend so much time fighting the school board. I just want my kids to go someplace where I know they're getting a good education and they're not being subjected to all the wokeness. And that's why the charter school is getting people coming in and, flooding in, even though there's no transportation. They don't do lunch there. Like, you have to order in lunch or bring lunch. I'm like, I don't care. They do uniforms, which I also like.
We have uniforms as well. That was important.
Yeah.
I think uniforms creates a certain atmosphere of education and professionalism,
seriousness. And you don't have to worry about fighting your kids with, no, you're not wearing that short skirt out of the house.
Right. We don't call our students, we call them scholars. All our students are required to address their teachers as Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Miss. There's a level of professionalism that you just don't see at government schools. And I think that adds to the culture and to the success of the learning environment that we try to create.
Yeah, I love it. So charter schools is one way to go if you can get in, but homeschooling, we talked about this briefly, but since we talked last time, I have realized that the amount of actual education that's going on in the public schools is only 2 or 3 hours a day anyway. And so, even if you're overwhelmed by the idea of homeschool, I think if you start looking into it a lot more, you're going to realize it's not nearly as time consuming as you think it is.
And it's an investment in your kid's future. So to the extent that it is time consuming, what better investment can you make? There's a lot of homeschoolers out there and homeschool networks. So it's not as if you have to be your kid's teacher for every single subject that you may not have competency in.
Right.
There are curriculum that you can use that will guide you. There are little pods of people that get together. So maybe you have a half a dozen kids and you share the duties of teaching, or you pool your resources and you hire a part-time teacher or tutor for your kids. Mm-hmm. Plus, imagine your kid being able to wake up at a normal time, not being forced to get up at 7 a.m, which is just unhealthy for children. And then, going off to school where they spend only a few hours of education anyways, and then they're taught in a way that is contrary to your own personal value system. Mm-hmm. Almost without exception, homeschool kids are academically ahead of their government school counterpart. And this notion, one of the criticisms of homeschooling is the kids need some sort of socialization, and that's important. And I want them to be able to participate in sports and other athletic activities. That all is available through homeschooling, where there's meetups and club sports and robust social activities that parallel public schools, but without all the garbage that goes on at public schools. So it's doable. It's an investment in your kid's future. It's the only way you can assure that your kids are going to grow up with the value systems that are important to you without interference from government education. It reminds me, Annette, people often talk about this separation of church and state doctrine, where we don't want the government in the churches, although they got involved in closing the churches across the country during the pandemic. But we sort of acknowledge that we don't want the government telling us how to pray, how to worship, what denomination we must be, et cetera. So there's this agreement that the government will stay out of the churches. But somehow I think the government should also stay out of education. I don't know why the government is involved in our education system. Yeah. It should be all locally controlled education based on what the parents in the local community want. It should not be a federalized or even a state system where the government is mandating certain curriculum. You mentioned CRT and ethnic studies. In California, it's the heavy hand of the state education department that determines the curriculum, like our crazy sex ed requirements in middle school and high school, and a lot of the curricular requirements like ethnic studies. So the only way to really get the government out of your children's life in education is to homeschool or to find a similarly valued charter school like a BCSI school.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's just getting worse and worse. I think I mentioned last time you were on that when I was subbing at my oldest daughter's middle school, I saw one of those little posters on the wall. That's the same thing as you see in these front yards of a lot of leftists. in our home, we believe, that gender is not binary, all this wokeness. And I'm like, in the school, on the wall?
Right.
Where's the plank of the Republican Party then? Are you going to put that up there to go along with it? Because that's all it is. It was basically the planks of the the Democrat Party up there and this was in a special ed class.
Yeah, it's not right to do that.
If you were in a social studies class, maybe, or government class, you have both parties' planks on the wall if you want to do a comparison. But you don't just randomly put it, your beliefs on the wall in the special ed class. And this, again, is in a conservative county here. And so I still haven't had, because we weren't allowed in the schools as parents, I still haven't had a chance to talk to that principal about that. But yeah, if you don't want to do battle with the school board, because it's a part-time job, honestly, and then you're lucky if you make any headway, then pulling them out and doing something else with your kids feels like the only option.
It's also important to do that battle. Remember Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And many conservatives are now waking up to rediscover that fact, that if they don't get involved in the local schools, they'll get what they deserve. And that is local schools that don't have the input of conservative values. And so getting involved is pushing back on the school board and superintendents. And most importantly, during election time, rallying behind candidates that support your values. You need to fund those candidates. You need to get out and create an army of people to walk for those candidates and knock on doors, hand out brochures, educate, and get conservative board members. It's not even really about being conservative. It's about getting board members in there that are receptive to the local community and the people that elected them. And so getting involved in local politics, both at the school board level that, a lot of people don't think is important, but it is important.
Hugely.
These are described as nonpartisan offices, but there is no such thing as a nonpartisan office in today's day and age. Yeah. And local city council races as well, very important. So it's super easy to get excited about national races, voting for a senator or a congressperson or president and so forth, but you'll have much more impact over your own life and your family's life by getting involved locally, school boards, city councils, et cetera.
Yeah, you're 100% right. We're gearing up for the election here in November because so many of us are ready to get rid of about 3 of our school board members that are not listening to us. So shifting gears a little bit, there's the whole COVID thing that's going on. I understand that America's Frontline Doctors has a lawsuit against HHS about vaccines being pushed on children. What's going on with that?
Well, as you know, they're coming after our children.
Yeah.
And from a scientific standpoint, it really doesn't make any sense. Children are at very, very low risk of bad outcomes from COVID. The CDC's own data says that if you're less than 20 is K through 12. If you're less than 20, the survivability if you get COVID, and not everybody gets COVID, obviously, so the numbers are even higher. But if you get COVID and you're less than 20, you've got a 99.997% chance of surviving. Heck, if you're less than 70 and you are reasonably healthy, COVID survival is influenza range. Mm-hmm. So kids are very, very low risk. When they get it, they achieve what we believe is going to be long-lasting, maybe even lifelong immunity. Mm-hmm. And now they're coming after our kids to vaccinate them, which doesn't make sense. And here's why it doesn't make sense. Regardless, let's just assume for argument that the vaccine is safe and effective. I don't believe either, but let's just assume for argument that it is. When you vaccinate a young child, you deprive them of the opportunity of getting natural lifelong immunity. And now the Pfizer CEO has even come out and said that folks will likely need a booster in about 6 months and most likely are going to need an annual flu shot, but only COVID shot. And because the COVID shot immunity is so narrow, it only creates immunity against a very narrow portion of the virus. It's the spike protein, only the spike protein, that when there's variants that change the spike protein even slightly, the vaccine immunity is no longer effective. Now we need a new vaccine that they'll be vaccinated with. when you get natural immunity, your body sees the entire virus, all the epitomes, the parts of the virus that stimulate your immune system. A great analogy I heard, can't remember who said this, it's not mine, but imagine you're an investigator and you're investigating a crime, and you either have a picture of an entire person, head and body and what they look like, or you have a picture only of the tip of their nose. So if you only have a picture of the tip of their nose, you better hope you can identify the suspect by the tip of their nose. So when you give a vaccine, you're only seeing the tip of the virus and your body's immune system responds to that. Now, if you're infected with a variant that doesn't have that exact tip of the virus, then you're no longer going to be immune to it. So lifelong immunity, we believe, is achieved through natural infection. Vaccine immunity is very, very narrow, likely require multiple vaccines over somebody's lifetime. And then you get into the whole issue of, is the vaccine safe? And it's not my opinion. Go on the VAERS website. We've had now over 5,000 deaths from vaccines. And the argument is, yeah, but it's the VAERS system. It's not a very good system. It's passive reporting. It's correlation, not causation. And all that is reasonable criticism. But the VAERS website, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, is a website that's run by the CDC and the FDA since the mid-1980s. And if it's such a bad, ineffective website, they've had 50 years to change it, and they haven't. So they obviously think it's valuable. And then when you compare COVID adverse reactions that are on the website, and we'll just compare apples to apples. So it's not a very good website, but how does it compare to other vaccine injury reports? So 5,000 and change deaths as of yesterday. They update it every Friday. What about all the other vaccines? Let's just compare apples to apples. MMR, tetanus, polio, hepatitis, all the tons of vaccines that we give our children. Well, if you look at it, and this analysis has been done, if you look at the deaths reported from every other vaccine that's not a COVID vaccine over the last 20 years, it's about 200 deaths.
Wow.
And we're comparing that now to 5,000 deaths over let's see, when did the vaccine start? Like in January or something? Yeah. So 5 months, let's call it 6 months worth of vaccinations, over 5,000 deaths reported, compared to 200 deaths over about 15 to 20 years with every single vaccine combined.
And yet, you know that people are only doing this because they're being pushed and pushed and pushed and sold on this vaccine. Because I had someone come over the other day and say, "Oh, I had a bad reaction to the vaccine. It was even worse than when I had COVID." And I'm like, "You already had COVID. Why did you get the vaccine?"
Yeah, that's another thing that doesn't make sense. And, and at first, from a safety standpoint, like most vaccines, you get a shot in the arm, and we expect the local vaccine to remain mainly in the muscles of your arm, diffuses down to your local lymph nodes under your arm, maybe to your neck, stimulates your immune system. But basically, the vaccine contents is localized to where the vaccine is injected. So, in Japan, they haven't allowed the use of Moderna and Pfizer vaccination because they're worried a little bit about the messenger RNA technology. And they did a study, was just released a couple, 3 days ago, to look at the distribution of the messenger RNA spike protein throughout the tissue of the body. And this is the first time, and it was just literally released. It's kind of a bombshell, but you won't see it, of course, on mainstream media because they get most of their funding, mainstream media, by pharmaceutical companies, including vaccine companies. But the studies showed that these spike proteins are being concentrated in many of our organ systems, including the ovaries of women and the testes of men. And so the thought of now injecting a young woman with this vaccine, where the safety studies have only been conducted for several months, they've never been tested on animal models to know what the long-term consequences are. They're still being used under emergency use authorization with technology that's never been used in a vaccine before, messenger RNA technology. We don't know what the consequences are. There are some doctors that I've listened to that suggest that this could cause massive infertility in the younger generation. And so, I think it's a form of child abuse to require or to encourage or to incentivize a young child to get this vaccination. It doesn't make sense scientifically. We deprive them of the ability to get natural immunity, which is lifelong immunity, likely, and we can potentially set them up for injuries that there is no recovering from. You can't unvaccinate somebody. Once they're vaccinated, you can't undo that.
Right.
And it makes no sense. The more I learn about this vaccine, I used to think some of these people are pretty out there and crazy, but that crazy line is being moved further and further away, where it's hard for me now to even recommend that vaccine to high-risk people just because of what I know about it. Its limited scope of immunity, the overwhelming side effects that are being reported to the VAERS system, the myocarditis, the heart infection that's occurring in children. I honestly don't think this is a safe vaccine. Plus, and maybe most importantly, is there's wonderful studies that are being released, of course, being suppressed, of the benefits of early treatment with, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and other repurposed medication, and the ability of these repurposed medication to be used prophylactically. So patients that are in a high risk group, what I do to the extent that they don't want to get vaccinated, which I concur with, is I just put them on prophylactic medication to prevent them from getting infected. And there's studies that show almost a 100% effective rate for prophylactic use of ivermectin to prevent infection. So all of that leads us back to your original question, America's Frontline Doctors filing this lawsuit, and it was a request for a temporary restraining order against the emergency use authorization to vaccinate our children. I hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears, and I hope that the judge looks at this carefully and reviews the science that was presented and agrees that it's inappropriate and dangerous to allow the FDA to approve vaccinations for COVID vaccinations for our children. It's wrong. Parallel with this, the Children's Health Defense, that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s organization, is also filing lawsuits to try to prevent these vaccines from becoming authorized, which we believe is going to likely be the push this summer.
Yeah.
And once these vaccines are authorized by the FDA, then municipalities like schools will then, I think, feel emboldened to say, listen, we require MMR vaccines to come to our school. Let's just add COVID to that too, and require COVID vaccines for our children. And I think that's wrong. If it happens, I think we'll see a mass exodus from government schools, and maybe that's the silver lining. Maybe we should allow it to happen. So finally, parents will wake up and abandon these government schools and create parallel schools that mimic their values rather than subject kids to the chronic indoctrination that's occurring in government schools.
Right. So the lawsuit has been filed, but it hasn't been ruled on yet. I'm assuming it's in a federal court somewhere.
It's in a federal court. It hasn't been ruled on yet. We expect that hopefully in the next week or so. It's a temporary restraining order. So it's basically, it's saying there's something so exigent, emergent, that we don't want to go through the regular channels of adjudication and so forth with discovery and this, that, and the other, that we want the judge to look at it and rule on it immediately, because it's imminent that they're coming after our children and our younger children. And we want a judge to put a stop to it, at least temporarily, while the case can be adjudicated properly with scientific discovery and the like.
Right. Well, I'm pulling for that. All my listeners, you need to pray about that. Let the judge make the right decision so we can adjudicate it fully. But it does need to stop, because you're right. I think that is what's the next thing is schools are going to want to require that. And like you said, that could be, that could end up being a good thing, but it can end up being a very bad thing for a lot of kids that end up getting the vaccine down the road. And that's the thing. We don't know. It could be so wonderful, or it might not be. And I'm I'm not going to make my kids guinea pigs. You know, this is not the Spanish flu. Kids are not dying from this. So why on earth would I make my kids take something that may hurt them in the long run? Not have
they're being pressured too. I mean, in California now, the governor has put taxpayer funds on the table to incentivize people. If you get a vaccine, you'll be entered into a lottery to win, you know, $50,000 or whatever it is. That's our taxpayer money.
the same thing in Colorado. It's
yeah.
It's
And when you talk to some of the kids that have been vaccinated, you'll find out they're not vaccinated because they believe in the science of it. They're vaccinated because of peer pressure. They want to fit in, that other kids are asking them and teasing them that if they're not vaccinated. They're vaccinated because they're told in order to play sports, to travel, to get on an airplane, to attend school. In California, the UC system, colleges have required that kids have to be vaccinated to attend school in the fall. Now, I thought that was illegal, unconstitutional, especially with an emergency use authorized vaccine. And so there are lawsuits being filed now to prevent that from occurring as well. But every day I get phone calls from parents saying, what do I do? My kid attends UC, fill in the blank, and I got a letter saying they need to be vaccinated. What do I do? And so we talk through it, and there are some vaccine exemptions that some schools are allowing, like religious exemptions, because the vaccines were either tested or grown in fetal cell lines. So there are religious leaders that are coming out with doctrinal statements against the use of these vaccines. And I think that's one approach. Or there's some narrow opportunity for medical exemptions if you've had allergic reactions to vaccines in the past.
Also, I know one of the schools here, one of the exceptions was pretty broad. It was like if you have a personal belief that would prevent you from taking it. Well, yeah, personally, I think it's stupid. So
California personal belief exemptions are not allowed. I mean, remember, I don't know about Colorado, but in California, you cannot attend a school, period, full stop, unless you're vaccinated. The only exception in California is to homeschool. There are no personal or religious exemptions allowed for routine childhood vaccinations. The only exemption is a medical exemption if you can prove that you've had a severe anaphylactic allergic reaction to one of the vaccines, and then you can get an exemption specific and narrowly to that vaccine. But it's even worse. Then you have to register that child on a database for the state of California. And I mean, I would never voluntarily do that to any child. So practically speaking, there aren't even medical exemptions allowed in the state of California.
Yeah, no, that's wrong on so many levels. All right. Well, keep me posted on what goes on with that lawsuit.
Absolutely.
And because let's hope that the judge rules the right way and we can push back on this and not subject our kids to this. But, you know, hopefully there are enough of us that are parents that are listening and feel the same way. We're not doing this to our kids, you know. It's one thing you try and force an adult into it. That's bad enough. But a kid, yeah, no, not doing it. So, well,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on. And again, you are on America's. You are one of America's frontline doctors, and you have a website, RX for Liberty, right? Like prescription for liberty.
Indeed, RX for Liberty. A lot of my material is on there. I usually write an essay every few weeks, and if you sign up for my email, you'll get that. I don't sell you anything. I don't spam you. I don't sell the news letter. I just send it out every few weeks to those that want to know what's going on with me. You can also contact me through my website. I return emails within 24 hours of anybody that contacts me through my website, RX4 Liberty. And I would encourage your viewers and listeners to stay in touch, stay in the fight, and remember, you know, eternal vigilance. And now is no more important time to be vigilant, especially when it comes to your children.
Yeah. If you haven't gotten involved, do so now. We need you. We need you in the fight. All right. Thank you for listening. Again, go to youtube.com and type in Annette Talks and subscribe to try and win that 72-hour kit. You're going to like it. It's really cool. And listen to, I believe it's episode 81 that I described the kit. And you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com. Amazon Music, Stitcher, Spotify, yada, yada, yada. Thanks for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.